And you're still tuned into Sakisi's Building the Nation Podinasi. And as you know, it is a Wednesday. So every Wednesday on Sakisi's, where the focus is on gender-based violence or gender in general. So today we do have our guest. She goes by the name Miss Kholiswa Nglombosese. I do apologize for nullifying your surname. And she is a gender-based femicide hotspot social worker employed by a non-profit organization called the National Institute Community Development and Management, and together with the National Department of Social Development. So Koliswa holds a bachelor's degree in social work with honors from Nelson Mandela University, and she is also one of the 3 social workers placed in the Western Cape to deal with cases when it comes to domestic violence and gender-based violence. So she is currently situated at Sarki Bartman Center, a safe home in Athlone, where she provides psychosocial support services to victims of crime and violence. So we'll just be talking a little bit more because you do also expand your services to Mitchell's Plain as well as to Nyanga. So Koliswa, just tell us firstly, like, what made you want to become a social worker firstly?
It's a long story, but what I knew is that I wanted to work closely with people. Like, I wanted to see the change. Okay, firstly I wanted to be a doctor, you know us. But when I grew up, I thought, no man, my maths wasn't that good. So I was like, no man, you can be a doctor in anything. It doesn't necessarily mean must be a medical doctor to be a doctor. So I was like, if I can work closely with people and still see the change just like a doctor, I'm definitely going for social work. And I like talking, I like listening, so that's where the passion came.
Okay, so the next option was going to be a psychiatrist then.
Yeah, psychologist, nurse, yeah, something there.
So speaking about that, and that is how you developed the passion and you chose your field. Also, like, what does it entail to be a social worker, especially here in South Africa?
Okay, so South Africa, with having so many social ills, I think more than anything, you have to be passionate yourself. You have to be very self-efficient. You can't always wait for something to happen, wait for the government for so any small change that you can do in your corner. Generally, as a person, I think you can basically be a social worker, if you can put it in that sense. But of course, you need the school. But I think in South Africa, as I've said, you just need to be self-reliant and just know your resources and make networks. That's the most important things, because there's a lot of people who are striving towards the same thing, just that we always want to work individually. So for me, collaboration is very important, networking and just knowing what is where and how you can get those services.
And just listening by what you're stating, when we do speak about South Africa, it has a great deal of problems on its own, and that is why social working is so important. And there isn't enough social workers around for the high load of work that they basically do work on a day-to-day basis. So based on that, when we do speak about social worker, it refers to you intervening when a child is in harm's way or so forth, or does it mean you do social working within the whole family to reintegrate the whole family together again? Just explain that part.
Okay, social work is very broad. There's a lot of areas that we work in, from an individual to a family to a child to a whole community at large, to vulnerable groups. People with HIV, people with disabilities, a lot. There's a lot that you can do, honestly. There's a lot of facets that come within it, but we are trained to be in any environment, just that when you maybe select work, now you get to be more specific, as in what more do you like dealing with? Is it marriages? Is it counseling? Is it GBV stuff? Is it children stuff? So there's a lot. So it's quite very broad. Then coming now to work. So for example, if you're at a DSD office, you would maybe do generic work, but now for someone like me, I'm now more specified, I'm more based on a certain field of social work, which is gender-based violence and femicide.
And that includes all ages?
And that includes all ages, yes.
And when we do speak about gender-based violence, it's always known that, or mostly it will be said, and this gets said amongst various cycles or groups of cycles also, where the female is always the victim of gender-based violence, which is true in most cases, but that doesn't mean males do not suffer or can become a victim of gender-based violence. So when we do speak about gender-based violence, do you intervene with females and males, or does it only apply to women and children?
Both genders, all genders.
The LGBTIQ plus included, yeah.
So in terms now of counseling, I'm very inclusive. But now in terms of shelter placement, that's now only women and children that I am dealing with. But there are, in social development offices, places that they know where they can intake men for shelter placement. But for me specifically, I don't place men to shelters, but I can definitely counsel men, so they can always come for psychosocial services, but not the placement as to remove the men from where they were situated at to be at a safe home. But of course, there are those services at the DST offices, of course.
So something very interesting that you've mentioned, that you do the referrals when it comes to the males and so forth. So there's a lot of single parents out here in South Africa, and not just generally in South Africa, but globally. So taking it in account that males are also single parents, and in some cases, it's the male that takes care of the child because the mother maybe has been on substance abuse or whatever the case might be, so she's not active in the life of that child. So what happens in a situation like that, where you as the father are seeking a safer, even for you and the children, because there is not a lot of shelters that you can go to that offer services to take in a father and the child. It's mostly just the mother and her children.
Yes. As I've said, Department of Social Development specifically has those shelters. Most NPO shelters are for the women and the children, which is NPO. That means NPO is privately funded and everything like that. But definitely at a Department of Social Development office, there is availability or even referral to shelters that do take men and their children to shelters for placement.
So that is where they need to go in order to seek that safe haven.
Definitely.
Because I just feel there isn't, like, we always emphasize on the woman and so forth. And me being a woman also, I advocate for them. But still, we need to consider and be realistic that males are also victims of gender-based violence. So as we've established, like, gender-based violence does not discriminate against anyone. It affects whether you are white, you are black, you are colored, you are pink, blue, whatever the case might be. Yeah, so gender-based violence affects all of us, whether it's indirectly or directly. So speaking about that, when it comes to like people are very especially when we look at the Cape Flats and the areas that you do work in, such as Mitchell's Plain and Yanga and so forth. So it's on the Cape Flats. So if we look at it, people will normally say, this is not my problem because I haven't been the victim of abuse. But in generally, it does affect each one of us. Whether you don't live in that house, you are the one that haven't placed that call to say something is happening in this household. Can you just send out a police vehicle or so forth? It's like, what do we need to be more conscious about when it comes to gender-based violence and not have that mindset, just because it's not happening to me, it's not affecting me?
So you've put it very nicely, because at the end of the day, it might happen next door and you do nothing about it. You don't know the future. It might happen to you, and the same way you responded to them might be the same way you respond to might be the same way they respond to you. So the main thing, I think, of course, we don't want to enforce ourselves in people's businesses, because that's what we always say, it's got nothing to do with me. They're a couple, they'll sort it out. Or maybe what if I report and now they get back together and I'm the bad person? So at the end of the day, you can always report cases anonymously. Police stations don't really need to know your name. They need to know the situation where it is. Then they can come and mediate the situation. So of course, first thing can be you as a neighbor or anyone who's witnessing that, calling the police firstly. Or if you know that person personally, you can easily, when you are in a social circle or whenever that you can talk or meet, even on your phones, can always share. There are numbers that victims can always contact, whether for counseling or whether for shelter placement, and whether just for inquiries in general, which is the GBV Command Center, which is a national helpline that I can also share the numbers of. There you can get, it doesn't matter where you are in South Africa, it doesn't matter what your language, home language you're speaking, there's always a consultant that's ready to be talking to you as a victim. And then there's a one for shelter placement, which is National Shelter Helpline. That's where I'm also working as well, besides Sarki Batman Center. So there is, when you meet with a person personally, you can always share those numbers. Then they call themselves if you feel like you don't want to invade their space or their relationship, whatever that they're going through. But if it's something that is of an emergency and you can see that the person's life is at risk, always call the police.
And what happens in situations, let's take it for instance, like you say you work in Delft and so forth, taking it from Uitsig's point of view, that's I think it falls under Elsies River, I'm not too sure. But if you look at that area specifically Uitsig, if you do report a case of domestic violence to the police, they always tell you no, they're not going to go in there because of these people keep on fighting, and when you come there, the victim says, my partner did nothing to me. So the police don't want to go in that areas anymore because of you as the outsider seeing the abuse happening. So now you doing the right thing by calling the police and saying, can you just send a vehicle to just calm the situation? Then they tell you they're not going to do that because once they get there,
the matter may be resolved already.
So what happens in a case like that? Because it also, you don't want to abuse the system, but then the system is also not fighting or assisting us. Like, how do we rectify or meet each other like halfway when it comes to that?
Okay, so I think at any organization, there's always like a hierarchy. So if you're not, for example, getting help from me as a social worker, maybe you would go to the next person or the person bigger than me. So at most of the time, if you report maybe a case, for argument's sake, at a police station, then you feel like, they're not taking me into consideration, or they're not taking me serious, or they think I'm lying. Mostly it happens to men when they come report cases of GBV. So you can always ask for the next person bigger than that police. So maybe it's the station commander, the sergeant available, the colonel, any person bigger than the person who helped you. Because at the end of the day, you need to escalate your case and you need to get the services as your right from this stakeholder. So you can always escalate your matter. You can always check for the person bigger than the one who helped you, and luckily they have name badges, so you can easily say, Mr. So and so, I asked for a van, or I asked for this. They said no, I'm always here, I'm always fighting, or anything like that they said. So you can always make those follow-ups as a person or as a victim or as a person who is on the ground looking for that help from that stakeholder.
Definitely, because it does come down to cases where I might, when the police come there and say, but nothing is happening here, I'm not being abused or so forth, because I fear for my life, because I stay with the perpetrator that is portraying this abuse onto me. So it's not easy for me to say at that point, but I need help, because where am I going to sleep after this? Or especially if there's children involved, like what happens in that situation? So that could be one of the reasons why people tend to say, but nothing is happening here. So hence it is still important for our police to still come out, and because at the end of the day it says clearly, or they sign clearly to say that they serve and protect. And then Koliswa, as your work is very, very hard, and I can imagine it's not easy doing this work. So working with people that are victims of gender-based violence and also the family of femicide, when it comes to that, like what are the challenges that you are faced with? Do you also get assessment afterwards in order, because you being a female and it's tend to say that we are emotional beings, so do you also get that assessment to that counseling to debrief yourself?
Yes, definitely. As I said, I think one thing that you should know first before you get into this profession is yourself. So if you know the client is telling you all their problems and their stories, and you start crying with the client, it's not going to work. So you need to be emotionally intelligent yourself. So of course we do get debriefing. I wouldn't call it counseling, because we do get a supervisor when you sit in the session just to debrief the week, which maybe case was the most challenging for you, anything like that. But we do debrief. But other than that, I think as well as a person, you should have your own kind of coping mechanisms. But I think for me personally, what gets me going is actually having had the opportunity to help someone. So I think that's debriefing enough for me. So of course the cases do get severe. They do get very severe. So as I said, the main thing for me is to know that I did my best on this case. Everything that I could do, I did. So that makes me sleep at night. Yes. Basically.
Because your mental state is in attack here.
So
So it is important that you need to get counseling afterwards, and especially when you do work with children or victims of abuse, and that child ends up back with the abuser. So at the end of the day, you doing the best that you can, but the last resort is the court. So it's out of your hands. So once the court decides that decision, there's nothing you as a social worker can do.
And sometimes it's even the client. Then you would go into the session with them, do all the therapy, do everything, and they assure you, or maybe because at a shelter, for example, you stay there for 4 months, depending on the shelter as well, how much they place clients. And then at the end of the 4 months, then you feel like, okay, I've done A, B, C, and can deal with this client. At least I feel like they are confident in themselves. They've worked on their boundaries. They know the red flags, everything like that. But 3 months down the line, maybe they call you, Koliswa, I went back. So those things do happen. At the end of the day, I can always say so much to you. You can always go for counseling, but at the end of the day, the onus is on you. If you want to build on yourself, want to work on yourself, want to remove yourself from the situation, it always lies on you. I can't now put you in a bag and be like, you're never going to maybe mission explain again because you're...
But do you do follow-ups?
Of course.
Okay.
Of course. But if now, for example, you're saying you want a home visit from the shelter, then no, I'm going to go see my mom, my sisters, my children. Then all of a sudden come back and be like, I went to him. So those things happen. So I always want people to always know as well that as much as you can get so much services, you still need to take care of yourself as well.
Definitely.
You see, so you need to check your environment as well and be able to be like, okay, at this point I can stand on my own. I've gotten all these skills from the shelter. I can go look for my own job. All of those small things. So as an individual as well, just you need to be as positive and as forward-looking as you can than to look back and just always going back to the things that hurt you as an individual.
And then just lastly, Kholiswa, as we will be running out of time, so just to convey these safe numbers so that people can contact if they do find themselves in any of these situations that we've mentioned before.
Yes, before the numbers, I also want to just tell the public that we are 3 social workers, as I said, in Delft, Mitchell's Plain, Nyanga and Gugulethu. We have awarenesses every month on the 25th. If you can just liaise with your nearest police station, I know in Gugulethu we work very well with police station, Lenteghe Clinic in Mitchell's Plain, Delft South Clinic in Delft, and Nyanga. There's Nyanga Men Empowerment, or just the Nyanga police station. They know the GBV social workers. So if you are a person who's a victim of GBV and incident has happened in the last 3 months, you need counseling, you can definitely come through and ask for one of the GBV social workers. They know us, and we do awarenesses every month. So as well as the numbers that we work with, there's a GBV command center, which is 24-hour toll-free numbers, which is 0800 428 428.
Quite easy to remember.
0800 428 428. Then shelter 1, which is 0800 001 005. 0800 001 005. So it's 2 easy numbers, and GBV social workers who are willing to assist you if you are a victim of GBV. Free service.
And that is the only ways how people can get in touch with you.
I could even share my numbers. I don't mind at all. Then you can just say which area you're coming from. You need counseling. Then we can just make those arrangements.
You can convey those.
My number is 082 637 976.
Thank you very much, Kholiswa, for taking the time to speak to us today. Are there any additional words in closing and also advice that you can leave with the public?
Of course. So you can never predict your partner being an abuser or anything like that. So I think when you just see that this person is no longer acting the way that they said they were, this is no longer love, don't wait until something big happens. And even when you report your case, don't wait for years. Especially if you want a shelter, we can only take a person that has had an incident in the last 3 months. So as soon as something happens, just go straight, work on it at that point before it becomes something big, before it gets to a stab and death. So the moment it's a slap, that's over. I mean, depending on you, I mean, that's a red flag enough to say, no, if a person loves me, if we have an argument, let's find ways to mitigate the situation. If you have anger problems, hence even with men, if you see that you can't manage your anger as well, you can always come to us. I think that's where they mostly lack, to be vulnerable. If you can't maybe be vulnerable with your partner, or if you're like, when I get angry I feel like beating you, then come talk to us rather. So yes.
And then just lastly, Kholiswa, before I let you go, as you conveyed the details, how people can get in touch with you and so forth. And so again, thank you very much for coming through. And it was just a delight speaking to you.
It was nice meeting you once again.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.